As we have some Western friends today who have come for the first time, I do not propose to take up any serious subject in continuation of or connected with what we studied earlier, but would like to give an outline of the presuppositions of spiritual practice. It is a well-known fact that any step, effort or activity requires an organizational spirit. We just do not act slipshod out of sheer sentiment or whim and fancy. All activity directed to success of any kind is cooperative and organizational. While we have been very busy in achieving worldly success through the centuries, and people are immensely busy even today in finding out ways and means of temporal success and practical convenience, it has now come home to the mind of everybody that things are not satisfactory. Neither the individual nor the world taken as a whole is satisfying. In spite of the fact that every country and every nation, every form of society and every individual is putting forth Herculean effort towards success, peace and happiness. But happiness is not found, success seems to be very far, and what we have is only tension, anxiety and insecurity even about tomorrow. This is the reason why people have turned to a new outline of approach and an entirely different kind of perspective of values begins to enter the minds of people, and we have today a talk everywhere of what is known as yoga, whether it is in the West or in the East. There is a hunger for what they call yoga, whether or not one knows what it actually implies or means. Somehow, without knowing its inner import, an idea has entered the minds of people everywhere that it brings something miraculous, something super mundane and finally satisfying to the true man, the true individual, the true person. Now this is a hope and a very good aspiration, no doubt. But while hope is always essential and is unavoidable in our life, it will not free us from a sense of insecurity about the future when it is not based on a rational background. What we are today is mostly what we understand and what we are convinced about. When we are convinced about any particular circumstance, we are free from anxiety and insecurity in regard to it. But where there is lack of understanding, insufficiency of knowledge, and a doubt in regard to what things prevail actually, naturally we do not know what will happen to us the next moment or the next day, merely because of the reason we do not know where we stand. So the asking for yoga is something like child asking for the moon, something beautiful, and it will be wonderful if you can get it in your hand, but how are we to get it? Likewise, we find ourselves in a situation of ardent longing and asking for what we cannot get in the world, merely because we do not seem to be satisfied with what the earth has given us or promises to give. Also, we have a vague notion of an infinitude of future, though we cannot intelligently substantiate this view or this opinion. We have a vague notion that we are bound for success and not failure. But for this notion in our mind, there would be no impulse from within us to ask for success or seek freedom. We do not know whether we shall rationally be able to prove the premise that we have in our mind, but there is some sort of a super reason working within us that tells us you shall succeed and you shall get what you are asking. Notwithstanding the fact, we do not know what we are really asking. We ask for something indefinite and perhaps unlimited. Our asking is also vague, as our understanding is equally vague. Now, yoga is nothing but definiteness of understanding and certainty of approach, clarity of action, and a precision in the modus operandi in our life. Nothing of the way can help us in the world. It is a new type of education and knowledge into which we are introduced, where we are sure about things, and every step that we take is a step of understanding. We do not take a second step unless we have placed the first step very firmly, knowing very well that the ground also is firm. The practice of yoga therefore takes us from one stage of firmness and fixity and clarity to another stage of it. We do not move from doubt to doubt or uncertainty to uncertainty or lack of clarity, etc. But it is all perspicuity of intelligence and definiteness of approach. Now, as I said, all such intelligent effort in any direction involves a setup we call rational. A rational setup is called an organization, while an irrational setup is called a crowd or a heap. When we have only a medley of people on a street, we do not call it an organization. It is just a crowd of people moving as they like in any direction. The forces of the world do not move like a heap or a crowd of powers. The world as we understand it today seems to be constituted of certain essential principles and powers, which do not seem to be thrown pell-mell, but are organized in a very definite manner on the basis of a law that seems to be operating. This law eludes our grasp usually, on account of which we commit mistakes and blunders and flounder in our life. We make mistakes because we do not know what the law is that operates behind nature and the world in its completeness. The yoga, therefore, takes into consideration the fundamentals of human life, the fundamentals of life as such, so that we are in a position to come in contact with forces that are and not forces that we imagine in our mind. The forces that are, that exist, that do operate, control us as they control everything else. And so, unless we have a knowledge of these powers, we will not be able to have a control or a mastery over them. We become weaklings on account of lack of power. And lack of power because of lack of understanding, lack of knowledge. Where there is knowledge, there is power, because there is control. Knowledge of a mechanism is naturally a sort of control that you can exercise over the mechanism. If you have not a good knowledge of the mechanism of a motor car, for example, you will not be a good driver. You know what will happen to you. Likewise, the world seems to be a good mechanism before us, a very beautiful organismic process placed before us, of which we seem to be a part, very, very intimately connected part, so that we cannot get on without it. We have to deal with the world in everyday life, which means to say we have to deal with everything in phenomenon. Now, to deal with a thing is to know a thing, or we have to suffer the consequences thereof. To meddle with any setup or fixture without a knowledge of what actually constitutes it would be to ask for trouble, as it is in science as it is in society, as it is anywhere. The yoga technique is a science par excellence that is before us. Science in the sense that is precise in its methodology. Whenever there is a very well coordinated system of knowledge and precise in its approach and very mathematical and exact in its articulation, we call it a science. In that sense, yoga is a science. It is not science like physics or chemistry, because while these sciences deal only with objects of sense, yoga as a science deals with supernormal objects which control even the objects of sense, which are at the background of objects of sense. So when I use the word science in respect of yoga, we have to distinguish clearly between the supernormal science of the world or the cosmos from the ordinary physical, chemical or biological sciences with which we are acquainted. The science of yoga is therefore a masterly technique of harmonizing life in its completeness. To put it in other words, yoga is harmony of approach, harmony of life. The Bhagavad Gita, a great masterly scripture of yoga, tells us that yoga is harmony. Samatvam yoga uchyate. It is a very simple definition given in the Bhagavad Gita, which has a fund of import within it. Samatvam yoga uchyate. Harmony is yoga, and disharmony is mortal existence. Earthliness, or as we call it in samsara, or some Sanskrit samsara, the chaotic life that we are living is due to the disharmony that supervenes in our day-to-day life. So we have to understand two things at least before we know what yoga is. One thing is, what does this harmony mean? What do you mean by this samatva or harmony with which you identify yoga? And what is life, which has to be in a state of harmony? These are two aspects of the approach to yoga that we can consider in a nutshell today. While we have to know what balance or harmony is in order that yoga may be known, we have to know where we have to bring in this harmony or balance. Naturally, harmony has to be brought into operation in our practical life. But what is life? Without going very deep into the structure of life, we may say in quintessence that life is an operational mood of our mind, on account of which we have different attitudes towards things outside, and all this based on a knowledge or an appreciation of a sort of relationship that we have with others. We have individual life, for example, the personal life that you lead. The daily routine that you observe is a sort of outline of your personal life. But you are incapable of living in the world merely as an outside individual, unconnected with others. You know very well how difficult and how impossible it is to live a completely segregated life of individuality. We are social beings. Aristotle called human beings as social animals. While we have animals in one sense, inasmuch as we have the instincts of animals, we are social. We just do not stray away in the fields as we like grazing cows. We have here the beginning of human organization, or an intelligent bringing together of parts into a connected whole. What we call human society is not merely people sitting together and chatting, but a psychological organization that we introduce into our mutual attitudes among ourselves. We feel that this organizational attitude among ourselves is essential inasmuch as we find it impossible practically to live an isolated individual life. So likewise, we go on expanding this society according to our convenience, and today we have a large society called the international setup. Today our world is one for political and social purposes, even cultural and spiritual purposes. On account of distance being obviated by the invention of modern planes, radios, etc., and people finding it convenient to travel quickly to distant places, we can say that the so-called physical distance of nations and persons today on the earth at least has been narrowed down to almost nothing. So we have a very large human society instead of having a village society or a family society or a small society of ancient primitive culture. So we have a large society of psychological units we call mankind or the brotherhood of humanity. This is how we try to live and understand life. What do you understand by your life? My life is therefore connected with many other people, the large society of human beings, and I have to be intelligently related to them so that there is no conflict between my will and the wills of others. This is the law of humanity that we have introduced for the sake of practical convenience. What is law? Generally, it is defined as a mutual agreement among people where the free will of one person does not contradict the free will of another person. If I assert my free will, well, it is good. I have my free will, I have to assert it. But you too have your free will, so you too will assert it. Thus, there is a likelihood of conflict of free wills of individuals. To avoid or obviate this conflict, there has been argued about a systematic and mutual collaboration of free wills of individuals, and this established principle of mutual collaboration of individual free will is what we call law. It may be national law or international law. So we find that life is large and is not limited merely to bodily individuality. The more we expand, the more are we happy. Where was the necessity for you to enter into a relationship of human society? Why should you concern yourself with international system and all that? Because you find that the larger you expand your attitudes and relationships, the more secure is your life and more happy you also are. Well, this is the beginning of the expanse that the mind of the human being feels a need for, and this need has been felt on account of a desire for perpetual happiness in life. We feel that if the whole world has only one army, as for example they conceive the United Nations, and there is no conflict of nations, there will be no wars, and so we are trying for a universal government of all humanity, the United Nations set up with one army, one government, one law, one humanity, no distinction of west and east, south and north, etc. A very beautiful hope that we have, but yet with all this possibility of achievement of a world government, can we be really happy? Ultimately will be a question that will arise in the mind of every person. Because while tentatively we can be happy with bread and butter, milk and honey perhaps, without wars among nations, death will overtake us. We cannot be saved from death. A situation which will come upon us any moment, any day, any time, any hour, any minute, we do not know when. This will shock us from our nerves. With all the world government that we have set up, there is a snag underneath the whole effort of ours, namely that we are subject to destruction by the operation of other laws which are not made by man. While the world government is a very good setup, but there is another government which has a law of its own and which will have a say in everything in this world, according to whose law we may be called back to other realms which we call death. How can we conquer death? You know, apart from this mystical difficulty that we have of the destruction of our physical individuality called death, there is a possibility of astronomical disasters. Even if we have world government and United Nations, there can be a collision of planets, which is not in our hands. The world government and a single army and a common table for dining of all humanity together will not be safe if the planetary constitution is not cooperating with us. The planets should move as they are moving today. The sun should not come near the earth, or the earth should not go a little nearer the sun. Some such catastrophe should not take place. Yet it can take place. Because these things are beyond human control, because beyond human knowledge. So yoga envisages a vaster cosmos. The world government of the present political system is not what yoga envisages. It has a larger perspective of life, the universe taken as a whole. Unless we are in harmony with the universe as a whole, a mere harmony with society and the international government is not going to make us happy. The catastrophes of life are of three kinds, as they say. We call them in Sanskrit the internal, the external, and the astral, or the celestial. We call them the adhyatmika, the adibhautika, and the adidaivika tapas, which means problems or difficulties that come to us from within our own self, such as disease and death. Problems that come from outside, such as from other people, animals, etc. Problems that come from above, such as from thunder, lightning, etc. Too much heat, too much cold. These are all beyond our control. The science of yoga is therefore a science of all things existent. It tries to study the relationship of the human individual with all the forces that constitute the universe. It is not merely a political peace that yoga is asking for, not even a social peace, but an eternal peace, an eternal happiness, which means to say unending, undying joy, which will have no end at all. Can we achieve such a state of experience? Is it possible? Though we have not thought well about this possibility, there is something telling from within us that such a thing is possible. We have not seen it, and there is no chance of our seeing it in the near future. Nevertheless, something tells us from within, an invisible voice speaks from within us that such a thing is perhaps practicable. That is why people come together, ask for gurus, and enter into institutions of studies of higher culture, yoga, spirituality, etc., with the hope that something superb and unheard of, magical, will manifest itself and their life will become blessed. While this is wonderful as a hope, it is also practicable as a science. This is yoga. Now, I mentioned that yoga is harmony. It is a balance that is to be introduced into our life. I gave an idea also of what our life is like. It is not political merely, though it is also political. It is social and yet not social. It is something more than all these things that we can conceive. It is universal, cosmic. Our relationship is with all things that we cannot even see with our eyes. We are connected with cosmic powers. Far distant stars are connected with us. The rays of light that emanate from millions of light years from a star control us, determine us, and have an influence upon us. Everything is mutually connected. As family members are related to one another, everything, every bit of thing in the world is mutually related, physically even connected, not what to speak of psychological relationships. Physical rays traveling from vast space influence us, determine even our thought, feeling and mood in life. Such being the case, we cannot say that we live in an isolated world. We live in a cooperative world, where forces collaborate with each other. We live in a house, not divided against itself, but in a house which is an integrated family of members. The whole creation can be regarded as a family of interrelated members who are organically related to each other, so that we can be happy if we mutually cooperate. So a mutual cooperation of forces in all the levels of being is what is called for in the practice of yoga. Now, this is what we mean by the introduction of harmony into life. Now, if you want to know what harmony is, it would be profitable to know what disharmony is first, because that is more patent in our life than harmony. Disharmony is disagreement. The structure and constitution of a particular person or an object does not agree with the structure and constitution of our personality. This is lack of harmony between two persons or two objects. When my way of thinking and your way of thinking will not agree with each other, there is disharmony psychologically between us. And when my physical constitution is entirely different from yours, physically we differ from each other. There is no harmony. Now in our personal life, to take it as a unit of life in general, we have the physical constitution and we have the constitution of our sense organs with which we perceive objects, the constitution of our mind or the psychological setup. All these determine also our relationship in human society. What we call society or the international organization, whatever it is nothing but the extension of the psychological moods and attitudes and understandings and appreciations of individuals. So, when we cannot agree with each other, we seem to be in disharmony between ourselves. If forces that constitute me can enter into the forces that constitute you, or they will not be repelled by the forces that constitute you, we would be in a state of harmony. I think as you think as I think. But, truly speaking, when thoughts concur, everything else concurs. Because things are ultimately determined by the processes of thought. Now, to introduce harmony into life then would be to try gradually to bring this system of balance from easier forms of organization to more and more difficult forms of it. The practice of yoga is always from the lower to the higher stage as an ascent. It is a gradual unfoldment of values, manifestation of powers from within us, so that at every step we are nearer to a larger reality. We have the easiest of forms of psychological attitude which is connected with other people. In our activities and in our movements in society, we are mostly connected with other persons and things. So, the yoga tells us that at the very outset, as an initial step rather, we should try to live in harmony with other people. This is the first step of yoga, which is known as yama according to the Sutra of Patanjali. A self-restraint introduced into our mind by which we do not revolt against human society. We are friendly with other people. This is not yoga in its ultimate reach, but it is a very essential first initial step of yoga. Because harmony is to be introduced in all stages of your life and not merely in one stage merely. It is not that you are asked merely to meditate on some supernormal concept. That is not how you start yoga. You have to prepare yourself morally and ethically as a foundation for the yoga practice so that the higher reaches will become more easy of approach. The first difficulty is social difficulty. We have social problems and political problems, visas, passports, and then unfriendly neighbors and other nations threatening one nation and so on. These are the external problems that we have. So unless there is external peace, there cannot be internal peace and vice versa. But we try first of all to introduce a kind of mutual understanding among people by sacrifice. Sacrifice is self-abnegation, the parting with your pleasure or personal satisfaction for the sake of others. If you are greedy, passionate or angry, you cannot be in harmony with human society. People do not like a passionate person, greedy person or an angry person because it is anti-social attitude. These are psychological moods which are opposed to the welfare of society or humanity. So first of all, what we are to try to cultivate would be not suddenly to meditate on the concept of God or the Absolute, which is ultimately to be done, but to see whether we are morally prepared and ethically equipped. What are the emotions in the mind, whether they are cultured or uncultured? Are they animalistic? Are they human or anti-human? social or antisocial. With these forms of analysis of the psychological attitude to human beings, we can be good citizens of the world and good at heart. You can be a good person, ethically and morally appreciated. This is the first thing that you have to do in yoga. First of all, try to find out, are you good at heart? Have you a sympathetic and appreciative attitude towards people outside? And are you self-subdued, self-controlled, and capable of making a sacrifice of your pleasure for the pleasure of other people? So this is the first step, moral, ethical discipline. Then you can, after you are convinced of your morally being sound and ethically satisfactory, slowly ascend to the next step of control of your own personality. Because while society is made up of individuals, yet there is what is called group psychology, apart from individual psychology. Students of psychology will know the distinction between it. Group psychology is different from individual psychology, though group psychology is nothing but a form of the psychology of individuals working in a particular fashion. After you are satisfied with your conduct and behavior in human society appreciably, you come to a control over your own self, which is the real start of yoga. That is to say, you begin to have some sort of control over the constitution of your own personality, the body, and all that is inside it. Now what is your constitution? What are you made of? Unless you know what you are made of, how are you actually placed in this world? It would be difficult to have a knowledge of your own self and a mastery of your own self. We have plenty of things within us. To put before you an idea of only a few of the constituents of our personality, we have the physical body constituted of the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. These are the 5 material elements which form the physical body of every individual, organic or inorganic. Now inside we have the vital energy or the force. You know what is called life principle permeates through the physical body. What distinguishes between inanimate matter and the physical body of a human being, for example, is the permeation of a vital force, a prana shakti as we call it, an energy, a vitality. This vitality or energy within us is not visible to the eyes because it is a power like electricity working within the muscles, nerves and the physical system. This prana, this vital energy, this shakti called prana within us is the operator of the sense organs. Just as there can be activity only when there is an impulse or a push from within, the senses can operate only when there is an impulsive force or a motive power behind them. The motive power of our sense organs is the prana within us. If you see, if you hear, if you taste, smell or touch as an activity of the sense organs, it is because the prana is active. And if the prana is withdrawn, as in death of the physical body, there will be no sensory perception. So, we have within the physical system of the 5 elements, the subtle ethereal electrical force, subtler than electricity, you may say, prana as we call it, and inside it we have the master or the ruler of our body, the psychological organ. And this is the most difficult of things to understand, because the mind is the understander. Who will understand the mind? How can you analyze the mind? How can you study it? While you can study objects, you cannot study the subject. The subject is the student. How can you study the student himself? So most people come a cropper when they begin to self-analyze, investigate into their own minds and intellects. And here it is that people are likely to go wrong in their estimation. Because self-condemnation and self-detection is not easy. There is always a tendency to self-approbation and self-appreciation. So self-analysis, while it is absolutely essential in the practice of yoga, while that is real yoga, nothing can be more difficult than that. Now, while this is the practical constitution of our personality, the physical body, the vital force, the sense organs and the psychological organs, transcendent to all these, we have something in us, the pure spirit, that we really are. The pure spirit, which is of the nature of consciousness, is the essence of the human being. This is supremely transcendent. We call it in Sanskrit Atman. In its universal operations and universal reaches, we also call it Brahman. It is the absolute reality that twinkles like a star within our own heart. And that is the reason why we are intelligent. That is the reason we are sometimes happy. That is the reason why we ask for unlimited wealth, unlimited power and unlimited life. Because the spirit within us, the Atman or consciousness within us is unlimited in every respect. Its knowledge is unlimited. It being universal, it knows everything. And because of the same reason, it is eternal. There is no death for that which is universal. And because it is unconnected with the objects, it is free from desires, and therefore it is supremely happy. That we are really the Supreme Spirit, the Atman. So this is the setup of our personality, and there is a corresponding objective setup of this very same organization within us. Just as we have the individual setup of the different layers of our personality, the physical body, the vital force, the sense organs, the mind, the intellect and the pure spirit, there is a counterpart in the objective universe as the universe of physicality that you see, the astronomical cosmos. The whole physical universe before you is the objective counterpart of your physical body. But what is inside the physical world, we cannot see. Just as we cannot see what is inside our physical body, we cannot see what is inside the physical world. That is why we are sometimes in a state of despair, despondency, and we doubt the existence of ultimate realities and turn materialistic, atheistic, and purely inorganic in our approaches. We see only the physical world, and we have only the physical body for us to see within ourselves. Nothing inside is seen subjectively or objectively. But how can the internal subjective principle behind objects be seen unless you cultivate those characters within you which belong to the subject? Now again we come to another very important aspect of the practice of yoga. While it is harmony in society and in the personal constitution of the various levels of being, it is also a very interesting process of knowing higher and higher realities by approximating ourselves to the subjectness of the truth. Yoga is difficult to practice because it is a movement from objectivity to universal subjectivity gradually. You can study objects, but you cannot study the subject. Because the subject is incapable of being externalized as something that can be analyzed in terms of space-time relations. The subject is independent gradually of space-time relations, while the object is involved in these relations. To approximate yourself gradually to the characteristics of the subject would be to approach the goal of yoga gradually. The goal of yoga is therefore ultimately to tell you universal subjectivity. This is a philosophical term with which we can define the nature of God or the Supreme Being. He is universal subjectivity. Difficult to conceive for our mind because the mind has never seen what is universal. It has never experienced what is pure subjectivity. We are involved in a discrete objectivity, limited relationship with objects, from which we have to free ourselves gradually in order that we may enter into the higher realms of inwardness and gradual expanse of our personality. So harmony, which is yoga, is a system to be introduced into the levels of life outwardly as well as inwardly simultaneously. Now subjectivity is a very important term that we have to define before we know what the practice of yoga would imply. Subjectivity is free from passions of every kind. You cannot have a passion for your own self. You know it very well. You cannot be angry with yourself. You cannot have greed for your own self. Which means to say, the subject is free from passion of every kind. Free from greed and anger and all antisocial elements. You cannot hate yourself. Therefore, subjectivity is free from hatred of every kind, free from passions of every kind, free from antisocial attitudes of every kind, and therefore to enter into the realm of pure subjectivity, you have gradually to shed these exterior moods that you have incorporated into your personality, such as moral passions and antisocial feelings. Finally, when we grow deeper and deeper into the subjectivity of our personality, we simultaneously also parallelly enter into the subjectivity of the outside world also. To know the inwardness of your personality would be to simultaneously know the inwardness of an object outside. Object and subject move parallelly in the universe. They are two parallel movements of truth, the object and the subject. So when you make advancement along one line, there is a parallel advancement automatically made along another line also. The more you know yourself, the more you know others also. The more you have a knowledge of the world. And the more you know yourself, the greater is the control that you have over yourself. And simultaneously, parallelly, the greater also, larger also is the control that you have over others. So that when you enter the deepest layer of your being, you also enter into the deepest layer of the cosmos. The Atman within is the deepest reality within us. And when that is entered, you have entered the deepest level in the cosmos, which is the Absolute. So to know the Self, the Atman within you, is the same as to know the Brahman or the Absolute outside. So this is the ultimate philosophical or metaphysical background of the practice of yoga, for which various techniques have been prescribed. The techniques being of self-control gradually. All stages of yoga are stages of self-control. In one term, one phrase, one word we can say, yoga is self-control. Atma Vinigraha is the way to Atma Sakshatkara. Self-control is the way to self-realization. The lower self is to be controlled for the sake of the realization of the higher self. The lower self is what we identify ourselves with in relation to the physical body and the localized personality. When we control it by the control of our passions and the perceptive apparatus, we gradually get into an insight of the realities that are in the world also. So what is the first thing to be done by a student of yoga? To subdue oneself morally and ethically first. The second stage is to subdue or control oneself physically by the regulation of diet, regulation of sleep, regulation of the ways of living generally, and a healthy living from the point of view of nature as well as from the point of view of human society. Healthy form of living implies also a healthy way of thinking, healthy way of feeling, and healthy attitude towards people. Health is yoga. Now health is a very vast term, which means the balance of forces again. While we can say samatva is yoga, we can also say the health of the personality in all its reaches is yoga. It implies all the levels of health: physical, social, vital, sensory, mental, psychological, and ultimately spiritual. When we take to the practice of yoga, therefore, we have to go gradually, slowly, and not in sudden jumps and bounds. You should not take a step of which you have no consciousness or awareness. Everything should be clear as You would not like to tread a path when it is pitch darkness. You put a torch and see what is ahead of you. So everything that is ahead of us is to be known at least one step ahead, so that we may place firm steps in the ladder of yoga. Social adjustments, moral discipline, ethical equipment, and physical discipline, diet, personal behavior, sleep included, would be the preliminary stages of yoga. Also, there is another important aspect in the practice of yoga, namely the choice of the environment and the choice of the subject of study for practice. The environment for the practice of yoga should be very conducive. That means to say, it should not be anti-spiritual. Anti-spiritual attitudes are the attitudes of material elements and attachment for objects. You should not live in the atmosphere or in an environment which is likely to sidetrack your mind, make you lose control of yourself, or tempt you with desires which are sublunary. Every person has a desire or many forms of desire. They can be controlled when you are in a particular atmosphere. For example, you are here in a holy atmosphere, in a bhajan hall, listening to a discourse. Your passions are subdued. Desires are controlled. Anger is put an end to, because atmosphere is such. But when you go out into the streets, the passions may come out, because there is an atmosphere which is not conducive to the subdual of your personality. So, it is a very essential advice from masters of yoga that a student of spiritual practice should always try to live in a conducive atmosphere where the very atmosphere will contribute to the subdual of the passions of the human being. In a holy temple, in a church, you don't have passions coming out because the atmosphere is such. Before a holy man, you don't speak vulgar terms because the atmosphere is such. So, it is essential that you live as far as practicable for you in your social life, in the midst of people who are elevated, enlightened, spiritually and culturally, whose vision is expanded, who see through things rather than see merely things, who have an aspiration for the higher. Company of such people will help you not only in studying things from them, but also indirectly will help you by the aura that they spread around themselves. This is the principle of life in ashrams, institutions, gurukulas, or in the holy vicinity of a master, or adept, or guru. So the atmosphere is to be conducive, as diet and sleep and your physical conduct and social mood should also be conducive. Then after having decided all these factors, you take to the actual method of practice, which is the direct control of your inner apparatus, the pranas, the sense organs, the mind, the intellect, and the spirit. The pranas are subdued by regulated breathing, because while physical discipline is essential, physical discipline alone is not sufficient, because the internal forces within us will upset all our external effort if they are also not simultaneously controlled. So you are asked to sit in one posture and see that the muscular system and the nerves within are placed in a proper mood of receptivity. And when you are placed in a mood of receptivity and seated in a steady posture physically, the pranas automatically move gradually, calmly, and in a symmetrical manner. The symmetrical process of breathing is called pranayama. While we are breathing without any rhythm or system in our method, on account of errors of thought and irregularities in our life, these irregularities being rectified, pranas become very subdued. As a matter of fact, Patanjali prescribes in his sutras a method called Kevala Kumbhaka, or sudden stoppage of breath without alternate breathing, because when your body and the nerves and the muscles are in a very controlled posture, the pranas automatically tend to subdual. And that tendency is the tendency to kumbhaka, or the retention of the breath. You need not hold your breath and struggle hard with suffocation to control your breath. That is not necessary. You place yourself in a very conducive atmosphere and sit harmoniously in a physical posture. You will find you are automatically turned into a subdual of the prana, and it becomes more accentuated when the mind starts concentrating. When the mind concentrates itself, the pranas also automatically get subdued. But you can help the control of the mind or the concentration of the mind by an easy practice of kumbhaka or retention of the breath for a few seconds in the beginning, during which period you can mentally chant a mantra or a formula, conceive the object of your meditation, which is the goal of your life, and so on. Then the very practice of the regulation of the breath implies the control of the senses. We are at a disadvantage with the senses mostly because we see, we hear, we touch, etc., and there is a desire in our mind generated on account of the contact of senses with objects. A gradual attempt of the mind to wean the senses from contact with the object is what is known as pratyahara in yoga, the first step in the internal court of yoga. You close your eyes, if you can, so that you may not be directly, physically in contact with perceptual objects. And you chant a mantra so that you may also have a holy mood created within yourself. And simultaneously, you concentrate the mind. The choice of the object of meditation is as important, perhaps more important than the choice of the atmosphere of your practice. This choice of the object of meditation is called initiation into yoga. You go to a guru, an adept, a master, who has practiced yoga for years and knows the pitfalls and difficulties and the turmoils on the path, and get introduced into the correct method of thinking in yogic terms and in yogic principles. This introduction of your spiritual life into a new way of approach altogether, which is supernormal, supermental and spiritual, is called initiation, which is a very essential step in the practice of yoga. When you are thus initiated into the method of meditation, you know how to conduct yourself psychologically and spiritually, and you fix your attention on that concept or the form or the notion into which you have been initiated or introduced, and place yourself in that mood perpetually. That placement of your conscious mood perpetually in the chosen object is called concentration and meditation. This has to be practiced for a very long time, for a protracted period, because we have been leading a very irregular and life of distraction, which has to be overcome by a newer method of approach. So, success in yoga cannot come so quickly, but it will come. It cannot come quickly or easily because of the impressions, subconscious impressions that are already embedded within us, which have to be brought out to the surface and cast out, so that the spirit within may reveal itself in its brightness and profundity. This is the philosophical and the psychological background and the practical outline of the science of yoga, which is a cosmic science of approach. Cosmic in the sense that it applies to everyone at every stage of life, and it is a most essential for a happy and perfected life of every individual. It is not a religion, it is not a creed or a cult or a code or an attitude merely connived by a person or a group of persons, but it is the fundamental fact of life, manifesting itself inexorably in all stages of life. Thus, a must and an unavoidable. It is the ultimate principle of the cosmos, manifesting itself in the human individual as a scientific approach to things, which is the background of the practice of yoga. Hari Om Tat Sat.